Thank you for joining us for the CAR-W Thought Leadership Series. This is the first of 4 programs that will take place over the next 4 weeks on Wednesday afternoons at 1 p.m. This series would not be possible without the gracious support from our presenting series sponsor, Landmark Credit Union.
Landmark Credit Union is honored to be the presenting sponsor for CAR's new Thought Leadership Series. Today, all CAR members, including brokers and affiliates, are affected by COVID-19. This challenge, like all previous ones, presents new realities and opportunities. For Landmark, we faced one reality that business lending would be managed remotely, but an opportunity to increase the use of digital signatures and contactless closings. Across the company, several innovations created to serve members had a positive outcome and will remain as permanent options. I am excited to hear about more creative ideas presented in the Thought Leadership Series from companies, industry experts, and economic analysts. I hope this series provides all of you with new opportunities that can be derived from today's reality.
We are also thankful to our 2020 CAR-W annual sponsors. For 2020, CAR-W's partner sponsor is Ergens. Please see the list of CAR-W sponsors on this slide. These are the companies and organizations that support our industry. We're going to dive right in. We have a fantastic panel of presenters with us this afternoon. We have Ted Balistreri, the owner of Sendix Food Market, Kimberly Kane, President and CEO of Kane Communications Group, Austin Ramirez, CEO of Husco International, and Rick Schlesinger, President of Business Operations for the Milwaukee Brewers. Our first question for each panelist is for them to describe their business 3 months ago. Then fast forward to today. Tell us what's changed and what stayed the same. We'll start with Austin.
Great to be with you. You know, how I describe our business hasn't changed a bit since before the COVID crisis. Husco is we design and manufacture electromechanical and hydraulic components for automotive, so passenger cars, and what we call off-highway, so excavators and backhoe loaders and forklift trucks and agricultural equipment. Those are our 2 main markets. We design these components and we build them all around the world. We've got 3 facilities in North America and facilities in China, India, and Europe as well. And you know, the COVID crisis has certainly thrown a wrench in things, but who we are and what we do and what our business model looks like really hasn't changed.
About how you described your business 3 months ago. How do you describe your business today?
Yeah, it hasn't changed. I mean, the business is the same. We do business differently. We've got a lot fewer people in our facilities. Our demand has really come crashing down. The automotive industry essentially shut down for the last 2 months. So our April demand was down 85% from what we thought it would be. So we've had to adapt and respond to the new reality, but it hasn't changed our business model. I mean, we still, we live and die by innovation and delivering our customers with proprietary, high-value, custom designed products. And we did that yesterday, we'll do that today, and we're going to keep doing that in the future.
Rick, how would you describe what you were doing 3 months ago? You were getting ready for a full season of Milwaukee Brewers baseball, and today we're still talking about it, but walk us through that a little bit. 3 months ago today.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the entertainment business, and we should be hosting the Giants in a night game at Miller Park, and we should be in first place. But the reality is our industry has come to an abrupt, screeching halt, and it's compounded by the fact that we're in a league with 29 other partners, and we can't independently operate our business. The Brewers can't play ourselves. We need 29 other teams to be working, and every team in every jurisdiction is basically on lockdown. And then, we've got, particular challenges dealing with players union, and also recognizing that to get back to what we're doing, this is going to be a very different 2020 season if we're able to resume it under any circumstances.
And are you feeling good about those circumstances, fans or no fans?
Well, whenever you've got the health and safety of our fans, we got the health and safety of our players, we've got a negotiation with the players on economic issues. We've got to get all of the governors and health officials and mayors in 18 states where we have major league clubs to agree to let us resume spring training operations and start the season. So a lot of moving parts. I'm optimistic because the one thing we know is the players, the coaches, the managers, the owners, we all want the games to be played. And despite having disagreements on the pathway, I think the ultimate goal and ultimate objective is shared strongly and equally by every constituent. And I think speaking with Governor Evers and Mayor Barrett, they want baseball to be played. And we know that baseball can be an integral part of, bringing the country together and providing some badly needed distraction from our daily drudgery. But we've got to do it responsibly and safely, and that's the trick. But I'm optimistic.
Great. Kimberly, how about you? Describe your business as a communications firm, a service firm. Talk about what you're hearing from your customers, your clients, and even your employees. Has that changed over the past 3 months?
Yeah, it's changed tremendously. So Kane is a results-driven public relations and marketing firm. And we use research to develop informed and strategic public relations and marketing plans for our clients. We've seen, a really interesting, phenomenon as a result of COVID-19 in that certain segments of the clients that we have been supporting for years really collapsed as a result of COVID-19. So many of the companies that we worked with in the for-profit, the business arena, really halted their marketing and public relations. They pulled us in to help them with employee and internal communications. So instead of investing their dollars on external marketing and communications, they've asked us to come in and really help them stand up crisis communications infrastructures to communicate more with their employees. Other segments that we've been involved with have really pulled us in and expanded what we're doing externally. Some of the large nonprofits that we're working with and the government entities that we're working with, those government entities are on the front lines of communicating to constituents about the health and the safety, the practices related to COVID-19, the things we need them to do to keep them safe. So our business has really fallen into 3 different silos with the business customers, the government, and the nonprofit customers. What we do hasn't changed. Where we're working, though, has changed. So our entire employee base is now working remotely. Thankfully, we're able to use technology to stay in touch with each other and to stay in touch with all of our customers. But how we're supporting our clients and the kind of projects that we're working on have changed. I mean, most of it is crisis communications at this point, working very closely with CEOs and C-level leaders who are making decisions very quickly and trying to keep their employees and their customers as close as possible.
Thank you. So Ted, I want to recast that question a little bit about your business 3 months ago versus where it is today. Kimberly brought up 2 really, I think, important points. One being able to work remotely, which, as we know, in the grocery business, that's not always the case. And the second is technology, how companies are leveraging technology. Can you speak to that in terms of how your business has changed or evolved over the last few months?
Sure. Thank you, by the way, for having us on this call. Great idea. Our business is different than most other businesses in that we have never shut down. As an essential business, we've continued to offer the same, basically the same product that we've been offering in the past. So, we're actually, because of the pandemic, and just to kind of put it in perspective, when the order went into place, the Safer at Home order went into place, basically shutting down restaurants and food service and ball games like baseball games. the consumer really had no choice but to purchase their food at grocery. And so our business has actually seen quite a spike in business over the last couple months. And we've also been dealing with safety and health issues of both our employees and customers. So a little bit different story from our end.
So you had mentioned a spike, which I think many would acknowledge and have seen that. Do you expect to be able to hang on to that increase in traffic and revenue for your business, whether it's taking business from another organization or being able to capitalize and double down on the way that you're doing your operations?
Well, I think time will tell. I think certainly there will be a segment, I think it's going to be a slow reemergence of the economy. I don't think people are going to rush back to restaurants, although, we'll see how that plays out over time. I think that as potentially a vaccine is developed and as people feel more comfortable having the virus, dealing with the virus, I think we'll get back to more of a normal. But I think it's going to take some time. And we'll see how it develops. We'll see how people behave in the future. But I think it's going to be another 6 to 9 months before we can really feel comfortable.
Yeah, and as we know, in those 6 to 9 months, even the 3 months that we've just experienced, so many things have changed in terms of how we look at the world, the habits that have been created, the way we look at things that may have seemed impossible in the past, whether it's working from the office or educating our children, in the midst of the pandemic. I want to ask each of the panelists to talk about that coronavirus moment when you realized, okay, I need to change the way I do things. I need to pivot. If you could talk about what that moment was and then what that pivot was. I know most of you have said that your core business has remained, but if you could speak to the changes that you've made and the things that you could also see as being permanent. And let's go in the same order. If we could start with Austin.
Yeah, sure. So we have a significant operation in China. That's the first region where we saw the impact of coronavirus in December, and then January was really significantly impacted in terms of our level of activity. I wish I could say, I recognized this was coming in December and we prepared for it, but the reality is we kind of had our heads in the sand just like everybody else and didn't really pay attention to the impact on our global operations until the pandemic was spreading rapidly in the US and around the world. Like I said, we haven't pivoted. We've, if anything, doubled down on what our core business model is, but we've certainly had to adapt to an environment where, the second quarter, our sales will be down over 40%. So that's required some really tough decisions. We've had to had some permanent reductions in force. We've had lots of people on furlough. We've cut all our CapEx. We've reduced every discretionary expense we can reduce. But the businesses that I operate in are cyclical businesses. So we kind of have a playbook for doing that. I think the big question is, what are the long-term second and third order impacts of the coronavirus on our economy and on our lifestyles, not just in the next 6 to 12 months, but in the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't have an answer to that yet, but I think the companies that can really understand how coronavirus impacts how we live and work and play over the medium to long term are the ones that are going to have a real advantage in the marketplace.
A follow-up to that, Austin, you had mentioned that if you knew about this in December, you may have done something differently. What would you have done differently if you knew about this sooner? Because I think a lot of businesses contemplate that.
Yeah, I did know about it in December. I just didn't act on it. In reality, what would I? Not much. I mean, when you're in our business, at least when your revenue drops, you've got to rein in your expenses. And our mission, as we navigate every recession or crisis, is twofold. One, we have to get to sustainability quickly. We can't have a financially unsustainable business. And the faster you solve that, the faster you can move on to the second objective, which is to really protect your core assets, your core people, your core new business programs. For us, it's our core technologies. So, those two things are a little bit in tension. You got to reduce expenses and you got to protect the core activities. But you know, that's our challenge in every recession, and this recession has been no different in that sense.
So there's some signs of familiarity, in other words, in terms of coming out of a recession. What does this look like?
Yeah, I hope so. I think Ted said it well, that, you know, nobody knows where this is going to go. And unlike the 2008 to 10 recession, or any recession in any of our lifetimes, you know, the economic activity today has nothing to do with macroeconomic conditions. It has everything to do with the biology of a virus. And that's what's going to determine what this economy does when we can get back to baseball stadiums. You know, everything is dictated by the timing of a vaccine or other, you know, biological factors that I'm certainly no expert in. But that's what I'm paying most attention to right now in terms of thinking about what the future state looks like.
Great. Rick, how about you? When you think about what that coronavirus moment was, I know that the decision to change the season, there is no playbook for how you go about making that decision. Can you talk about that moment and then what steps immediately followed?
I mean, I think we were seeing things in February, you know, take a turn, and you know, I think that the moment for us was when the NBA postponed its season in mid-March. Clearly, you know, we saw a lot of sporting leagues around the world shut down, but when, you know, the NBA, you know, shut down, that was sort of a key moment, and we knew that, you know, within hours we were going to suspend spring training, and I knew the minute we suspended spring training that we were in for a long haul, because unlike most other sports, you can't shut down players and then 3 days later or a week later get them back. Pitchers take weeks to recover from inactivity. The nature of our sport is so different. So that was I knew when the NBA shut down that we were next, and that we were going to be in for a long time of inactivity and uncertainty. And then, you know, I think the reality is you know, nobody really knows how we're going to get out of it or when we're going to get out of it. I still, you know, I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I actually think that the financial crisis was much more severe and had the potential to destroy the country far more than this virus. And I still remain convinced, even though the obvious impact of the virus on unemployment and, you know, all the businesses that have been shut down and, you know, irretrievably lost, I remain convinced that we're gonna get out of this. And people, we're social creatures. We have created an entire social network of interaction, of restaurants, of going to sporting events, of being with people. And I think that human nature is going to reassert itself. And obviously for our business, we need that because we rely so much on live attendance. And in particular in Milwaukee, where so much of our revenue is generated by people coming to the ballpark, you know, we need that, you know, return to the social interaction and the experience of a live event, and I think we will get there.
You mentioned something in your earlier comments about relying on all of the teams. So you've got all these different markets and all of these different teams. Are they pretty united in the way that they're looking at this reopening? Or just like you have different states that are at different phases, do you see some states that are pushing for a quicker reentry? Or are you guys all, again, aligned?
Yeah, I think there's a general, you know, consensus among the teams in terms of, you know, what we need to do, and again, we can't act individually. You know, we need everybody else to be lined. It doesn't make much sense for a baseball season if 8 or 10 teams can't participate. The fans won't tolerate that kind of a season, and certainly it will cause issues if the teams can't return. Now, some teams, they may not be able to play in their home ballparks, but we have options. Some teams may be able to play in their home ballparks and ultimately may be able to play in front of fans, while others can't. So we know that there's going to be differences there. And I think from our perspective, you know, the economics of our game are so tied up into the performance of each of our individual clubs. From our perspective, we want every club to be as healthy and economically viable as possible. So if one team has an advantage in that regard, we want them to take advantage of it and exploit it to the extent they can. And for other teams that can't, it's okay. I mean, it's just a pathway to, you know, a general economic rebound for our sport. But yeah, there's a lot of agreement. The trick, of course, will be getting the players to agree with our vision of the economics. And that's always a challenge because whenever you're talking about dividing up a reduced pie, it's invariably going to cause tension and conflict. But again, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to resolve those issues.
Great. Kimberly, how about you? If you could just speak to that coronavirus moment and then the permanent changes that you see for your business or the permanent changes that you see within your clients' businesses and how they deal with communication or crisis.
Sure. I'd say the defining kind of coronavirus moment for us happened the second week in March when one of our clients, who has a very large organization, thousands of employees, very decentralized communications infrastructure, pulled us in. This was probably right after some of the first cases in Wisconsin were announced. And they needed us to help them put together a crisis communications plan and literally stand up crisis communications infrastructure for them. So as I think I spent 3 or 4 days on site with that client, along with another one of my team members, you know, getting that infrastructure put together and putting the planning together, and then messaging with my leadership team at the same time about our own response to coronavirus and how we were going to handle the coronavirus safety for our employees and communication with our employees beginning the following week. And it was on Monday that one member of my leadership team said, you know, our employees are really afraid. They're really concerned for their safety. So I wasn't there on site during the first half of the day. I was still with my client, where they put together a quick, here's how we're going to go remote training. Here's how we're going to use technology to stay in touch with each other. Here's how we'll have to use technology to stay in touch with all of our clients. And when I got back to the office that afternoon, I wasn't prepared kind of for the fear that I saw in the eyes of some of my employees. You know, the news at that time, of course, was very grave and very serious. And in the world of public relations, we have news, you know, surrounding us. And a decision that I wasn't prepared for at that time was looking at where we were going as a business and looking at the priorities of my employees and their fear. And in that moment, having to say, I've got to let go of the business decisions right now and make a decision that is in the best interest of my employees. I just have to let go. And I was not a fan of the remote work setting. I like people in the office. I like to be in the office. So going remote was something I was hesitant about, but I had no choice at that moment. So from that moment on, we've been working remotely. What's been interesting for me, and I think for my team members to see also, because we work in such a diversity of industries, I mean, we work in commercial real estate, we work in hospitality, we work in manufacturing, we work in social services, how each one of these industries has been impacted differently. And I think how they've been affected has been different, and how they're going to rebound is going to be different. I think the commonalities, though, among all of them is the recognition that they have to communicate. I mean, in these moments of crisis, the first thing that employees and their customers do is turn to them for answers. And if they're not prepared, if they don't know how to communicate with their employees, if they don't know how to communicate with all of their customers, they run into some real challenges. So I think looking at how those industries come back is going to be very different. You know, Rick mentioned something that I think a lot of us are grappling with right now, and that is, to some degree, we're losing the messaging war, right? So we're still seeing the number of cases going up here in some communities in Wisconsin, but people want to begin to return to life as usual. They want to begin to go out and be with their friends and their colleagues. So the messaging needs to begin to change to safety. As you know, as our clients are beginning to look at reopening their businesses, their return to work plan, you know, instead of we need to hunker down and stay in isolation, they're opening up and looking at how do we begin to accept that people want to come back to work, or that people need social services or they need healthcare, and how do we begin to talk about how we do that safely? So the industries are beginning to open up differently, each one of them at a different pace, but the messaging is beginning to evolve to here's how we can work together, here's how we can keep you safe as the economy begins to open up.
And Ted, I want to ask you a question about a workforce question. Kimberly touched on that idea of some people react to it in one way and others another. You have found yourself in a position where you need to add workers to help facilitate your business. What has the overall mood been and the pace of hiring? What are some of the things that you're hearing out there? And was it different a few months ago, and how is that evolving over time?
Well, sure. First of all, a few months ago, there was arguably more of a labor shortage. Now we don't have really trouble finding employees. We've added over 150 employees. For us, that's a big number. And most of that has been geared towards our online business. And that's our online curbside pickup or home delivery business has really seen an increase, an 8-fold increase in business since the pandemic began. One thing I would say is I know a lot of businesses are contemplating how they're going to reopen and do business in this atmosphere that we have. One thing that I can say is that we haven't closed down. We've basically conducted our normal business. We've altered a few things. We don't have hot bars, salad bars, things like that, self-serve stations like we did in the past. But for the most part, we're operating normally. And the message that I would give to people is that if you follow the guidance from the CDC and other experts, we can learn how to do business with this virus being present in our community. Things that I think are really important, and Kimberly talked about it in terms of really assuring your workforce and your customers that you have to be a leader and you have to be able to enforce the guidance and give that sense of calm and a bit of normalcy to your workforce. In our company, we're very much a servant leader type organization. So our leaders were all out in our stores working side by side with our employees. But the big thing, that I would say is that if we, and again, I'm no expert, but if we do the things that are recommended, wash hands, don't touch your face, social distance, wear a mask, disinfect high touch areas, stay home if you're sick or if somebody in your household is sick. I think as employers, we've got to allow people to, stay home if they're not feeling well, or somebody in their household is not feeling well. We don't want them coming into work. And if we do those things, we will calm any fears that people have. One thing that we did almost from the get-go is we let everybody in our company know that if they didn't come into work, they would not lose their job. That's a little bit daunting because, we felt like we, as an essential business, we had to keep our doors open. But allowing our employees to understand that their job was secure and we trusted them to make a self-assessment as to whether or not it was the right decision for them to come into work. And whatever they decide, we would accept that. So if you're transparent, if you trust your workforce, if you follow the guidance that's been issued, we can learn how to and operate our businesses safely in this environment.
So, and this is kind of off the script, but have you thought about if someone would come to you, and maybe you've had this, and said, I don't feel safe coming to work, or I have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Like, have you thought about what that looks like? And what does that communication look like? Or is that more of a legal term or a legal question?
Yeah, no, and yes, thought about through all these scenarios. And if somebody, and we have had people just say, look, I don't feel safe coming into work. And we said, that's no problem. Your job is secure. When you feel it's appropriate, you can come back to work at that point in time. And that's what you want. I think that built a lot of trust with our workforce. And then we've got a whole protocol in place, step by step, dealing with a positive test. Luckily we have not really had any issues.
Oh, that's great. And I have a question now for Austin about supply chain. And Ted, this might be a question you could think about too. But we've heard a lot about, especially global companies, as they're sourcing materials for manufacturing, that there have been disruptions in the supply chain. Whether you've had those disruptions or not, have you been forced now to think differently about that, whether on a global or regional scale?
We started thinking differently about supply chains in 2016 when the Trump administration came to power. And we've got a heavily global supply base. We source a lot in the U.S., and our U.S. suppliers supply our global plants, but we also source a lot in China in particular, but also in India and Europe and South America and other places. So, we've been on this increasingly anti-globalization, nationalistic trade trend for the last 3.5 years. I think the COVID pandemic has accelerated that. We're not rushing to reshore all of our supply base into the U.S. That's happening a little bit on the margins, but more we're thinking about how do we ensure that our supply base is robust and it's agile, and in a lot of cases that means having 2 suppliers. In some cases that means having more regional supply bases, so maybe production's coming back to Mexico but not to the U.S., or maybe we're just shifting the mix between our existing supply base so that our American suppliers are supplying more to our American factories, and the same in Asia and Europe. So in that sense, I think COVID has accelerated existing trends in terms of supply-based redesign, but not fundamentally changed anything.
So Ted, I'm going to toss that one over to you, and it might be a little bit more on the reactive side. I don't know, but if you could speak to that a little bit. I know with various meat shortages or toilet paper shortages, can you speak to that a little bit about how you've maybe thought differently, whether it's an opportunity or a challenge?
Well, I think it's both. What I would say is that the supply chain is, very complex, but very efficient. And we saw that borne out when there was a run on toilet paper and the shelves are empty. The supply chain is so efficient at predicting usage, et cetera, that they didn't have a stockpile of product to draw on when there was the run. But the thing about it is that there's enough toilet paper for everyone, and within short order, the supply chain the manufacturers will start meeting the demand again, if they haven't already, and we'll see that happen now. I know the big news is meat, and really that's a product of the fact that there have been some outbreaks in some of the meatpacking plants. But they'll figure that out in short order, and I suspect that before too long we'll see that get back to normal, probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So, maybe the opportunity is, from our perspective, is when you can see, and it was interesting to hear Austin talk about, he could see what was happening early on in China and other places, but it's hard to react. Maybe being more aware of what's happening in remote places of the world that may have a big impact on our businesses, and we can have our own, work on our own supply and beefing that up in anticipation of events like this. That's pretty hard to do, but maybe that's our opportunity.
Rick, I want to toss it to you and talk about what the opportunities might be. I mean, baseball has been baseball for dozens of years. So now to think differently, and I know you had mentioned, trying to press on with a season that might look a little bit different, whether it's fans in the stands or no fans in the stands or spaced out seating. Can you talk a little bit about what that opportunity might be, whether it's with sponsors or ticket pricing or merging efforts with different teams?
Sure. I think one thing we know is the television consumption of our product, if we're able to start the season, will be, at least for a while, the only way you can watch or consume baseball is through television. So we're trying to figure out ways to make the television product more entertaining. We're trying to figure out how we can integrate sponsor insertions virtually in our broadcast to give some value to some of our sponsors, because obviously there's not 40,000 people seeing their signage at Miller Park. We're also looking at this as an opportunity to make some adjustments in the game itself. I think one of the things that baseball's been struggling with for the past few years is pace of play and the sense that games are too long and there's not enough action. And so this is an opportunity to try to figure out if there's rule changes or roster changes or the changes in how we play our game to make it more interesting, especially to millennials and people whose attention spans are maybe a little different than my generation. Long term, we've been thinking about how we can open up the ballpark to fans, whether it's sometime in 2020 or next year. And baseball has been doing a lot of analysis because obviously these are issues affecting all 30 clubs. I wouldn't say we've zeroed in or honed in on anything specific. Everybody is looking at potential for, staggered entry times, restrictions on carrying in purses or backpacks because you want to limit the number of touch points between humans. We're looking at, seating options. We're looking at, a whole range of things. Again, we're not sure, but we're modeling a lot of stuff. And I think MLB will probably come up with sort of uniform protocols to the extent they can. And then individual jurisdictions will obviously weigh in on what we can do. But again, our business model doesn't really work if I can't sell 40,000 tickets to a game. So, necessity is the mother of invention. So our focus is going to be on how can we in the future, accommodate mass gatherings of 40,000 people and convince people that what we're doing is safe, and to eliminate any of the concerns that may be a residue of this pandemic from infiltrating and inhibiting decision-making in terms of ticket buying or whatnot for our game.
So in Milwaukee, we do have one unique advantage, I would say, and that is tailgating in the parking lot. So I didn't know if there had been any consideration for taking advantage of that, whether it's allowing tailgating to continue during a game or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a lot of fans asking us if, even if they can't come inside the ballpark to watch games, can they tailgate in the parking lots? And again, that speaks, volumes to the sort of the culture of our fan base, and the fact that people, again, they want to be in an atmosphere with others. And my response is, if there's a way we can do it, safely and in accordance with whatever health guidelines, I want to see, if I can't have people in the stands, I would like to see people in the parking lots enjoying as much as baseball as possible. And listening to Bob Uecker, the sounds of Bob Uecker throughout the parking lots would be a great, an emotional boost, and not even if it's not really a revenue boost to us.
No, that's great. Kimberly, can you talk about a little bit about the opportunities that you've seen emerge from this, whether it's for your business specifically or for some of the clients, how they're really seeing this as that opportunity? Because we can't really change much about this except how we deal with it.
Yeah, I think we've seen that internal and external communications have played a really defining role throughout this crisis. And I've heard you talk about this a couple of times, including on the BizTimes webinar last week. People are really interested in information. They need information. And not only do we as leaders need to be there to share information with our employees or with our customers about what we're doing and how we're doing it, but we need them to change their behavior based on the information that we're sharing with them. And I think a lot of companies have found themselves unprepared to communicate with employees and with their stakeholders during this crisis. Our business model is a little bit different, Tracy, in that we believe that communications is a core business strategy. It needs to be part of a company's operation from the moment they're thinking about a new product or a new service or a new strategy. And we found that when companies align their business planning and their communications planning, they're able to achieve business results a lot more quickly, regardless of what those are, whether it's employee engagement or increased worker productivity, or you're launching a new product. But companies that don't have kind of an understanding or a knowledge about how to communicate, or they've seen, public relations and marketing more as a way to get great headlines or a way to get great creative out there, are realizing that treating comms as a tactic instead of a strategy has left them behind. So I think one of the changes that we will begin to see is that companies will begin to see communications is more of a core business strategy. And I think they're going to start bringing communications to the table out of the blocks. I think we have found, my company, I found worker productivity has gone way up. By working remotely. We have our managers working a lot more closely with our employees, and we're taking kind of a Peter Drucker approach, a management by objective approach to what we're doing. But all of that is made possible because we're communicating more with our employees. So I think that companies are going to start thinking, if they haven't already, about who is our target audience? Do we know how our target audience wants to receive messages? How are we getting information to them already? And if we're not able to answer those questions, I think we're going to have to start doubling down on answering those questions. Will help us keep our employees engaged. It helps us bring our customers close. But, I know there's also talk about, well, what happens if there's a second wave? And I don't think any one of us wants to be learning lessons a second time. If we could be learning them right now, and turning on that communication spigot is one of the easier lessons I think we can learn.
Just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, you can ask in the chat function. I know that I'm getting text messages, so thank you very much. If we have about 15 minutes, I also have about 90 minutes of questions that I could continue to ask, but we're gonna keep this until 2 o'clock. Again, if you have questions, you can ask it in the chat function. All of our presenters have said that they are open to most questions within reason. So I want to talk a little bit about, Kimberly, you had mentioned second wave, preparation. I mean, whether it's a second wave of a coronavirus or another disruption, it's, we have to be prepared. So I want to kind of go around the horn and talk about that, being prepared as a leader, and what that's really meant to you, and how that may have changed your role as a CEO, as a leader of your business, of your operation. So let's start with you, Ted. I know you had talked a lot about your interaction with the employees, but can you talk a little bit about how you see your role changing or evolving?
Well, sure. First, I would like to echo Kimberly's comments. I think we have sent out more communication to our employees and customers in the last 2 months than we normally send out in a year. Just keeping them informed and addressing any concerns that they may have head on. Again, trying to build trust both with customers and employees. In terms of planning, one of the things that we did, and we just completed it probably a week ago, we took a subset of our executive team, and actually about 4 people, and we worked through some scenario planning. We basically said, in a best case scenario, this is what we see happening in the next 9 months. Or actually, we took different time periods. Next 60 days, through the rest of the year and then next year. And then we took a worst case scenario and we did some scenario planning on that. We, you know, if things really go bad in this virus, we don't get control of it. We have a whole set of action items that we're going to do in that situation. And then we looked at scenarios in between, more moderate scenarios. And using that, we feel like, you know, the idea is not necessarily to get it right, but to think through all the different actions that you may take as the situation develops, because we really don't know what's going to happen in the future, if there's going to be a second wave, et cetera. But being prepared for it, I think, is really important, especially for your leadership team and you as the president, CEO.
That's great advice in terms of scenario planning. I think we can all define what best case scenario and worst case scenario is differently, but no, I think that's great advice. Austin.
Well, now one thing I was going to say is that we're in the process now of we've made some changes to our plan for the year, obviously, and now we're going back out and communicating that all to our employees so that they know exactly what we're looking for in the next, you know, 6 to 9 months. What are our priorities as a company? Not surprisingly, health and safety of employees and customers is probably the number one thing.
So Austin, along those lines, you know, we talk about the importance of communication. There's good news, you know, as people, you know, you're changing your strategy, you're talking about health and safety, but then there's that really difficult news of, hey, we need to do a furlough, or we're cutting this division, or some other change that might impact somebody really personally. How have you kind of dealt with that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think the job of a CEO is, you know, it's a lot of fun when times are good, and it's kind of crummy in times like this. But that's what we get paid to do, is to make the tough decisions. And I think what I have found is that when you communicate transparently with employees, even if they don't like the decisions you're making, they understand why you're doing it. We've had to do a lot of awful stuff over the last 2 months, like I mentioned, permanent reductions, furloughs, you know, all kinds of things that I don't like, that our employees don't like. But I found our team to be incredibly supportive. And I think a lot of that is because they understand what's going on. They understand our logic. And I say it every time I talk to employees, my job is to keep us sustainable. And if our future depends on some V-shaped economic recovery in 3 months pulling us out of the fire, that's the easiest way to make this company go away. So we have to cut hard, cut fast, make tough decisions now to protect the long-term security of the business. And we're transparent about that. We're transparent about our financials. And I think when you treat people like adults, they respond like adults.
Now, in terms of when folks return to whatever that normalcy looks like, do you expect to include more automation? Are you thinking about that in terms of how you're reshaping your business? So, you know, whether that's for a growth strategy or whether it's to deal with the fact that people are unpredictable?
We are heavily invested in automation at Husco for the last 15 years. So I don't think our automation imperative has changed because of COVID. I do think it changes how you think about team building and culture and kind of traditional office operations, because I think some of those things are permanently changed. I mean, our ability to go and travel and meet with our customers, you know, it's zero now, but I think for years it's going to be significantly reduced. So how do we think about doing that effectively in a virtual environment? It's you know, Zoom's great, and we've used it effectively, or tools like it, to keep our productivity high. I think Kimberly mentioned that productivity is as high as it's ever been, and you know, we found the same thing. I've been amazed at how people have responded to working from home and collaborating virtually. But as this sinks in and things become permanent, I think we're going to have to get more creative for both customers interactions, supplier interactions, and maintaining and building our own corporate culture.
Well, and interesting, both Austin and Ted, being in a business where you have a high employee touch, you know, and what this really means. And you've got all ends of the spectrum, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's service, whether it's office work. It's a huge consideration for so many of us. Rick, I want to ask you a little bit about that employee piece and that communication. I mean, so much of it has to be local, but so much of it is driven by others, and it's so much out of your control. Could you speak to how that's going with the players, number one, and then how the fans are responding? I know as myself as a fan, I found the communication to be very understandable, but I'm sure you see all ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not calling the players regularly and checking on them. I do text with them, and they were donating funds to our employee relief fund, so I was reaching out to them and letting them know how that was going, and they were very happy that their donations were going towards people who could really use the money. Our manager, Greg Council, talks to players all the time. It's been very difficult for the players. They are creatures of routine. The last time any of these guys were off in the summer was probably when they were 7 years old. I mean, they've been playing professional sports at an elite level since 6th grade, and for them not to be training or playing, rehabbing in an environment with their teammates is really difficult. And I think it's challenging to try to keep them focused and engaged, but that's one of our jobs. And that's why there's a push to, hopefully get spring training resumed so we can get our players back and see what kind of shape they're in, number one. And number two, and get, sort of the cohesiveness, the bonding. A lot of spring training is not just getting players ready physically, but it's getting them ready mentally. And it's creating, 25 guys and creating a team out of that. When you disrupt that dynamic, you have to rebuild it. From our perspective, dealing with all of our employees, we've got 410 full-time employees and, several thousand part-time employees. So obviously communication has been difficult. And especially since a lot of decision-making is out of our hands. It's determined by the league. It's determined by what other teams are doing. It determines by, 18 different governors in 18 different states. I think what we're trying to do is tell our employees what we can tell them, and not being afraid to say we don't know, and really avoid sort of predictive kind of comments based on less than all the facts, because it's okay to be optimistic, but we have to be rational and reasonable, and we have to be nimble. And our employees understand that we've got fiduciary obligations to shareholders, to fans, to our customers, to our players, to our employees, and we've got to make sure the business long term is viable, healthy, and able to take advantage of the changing economic landscape.
I think you brought up a really good point that we don't talk about enough, and that is how sometimes crisis brings out the best in people and the really good in people. And there are professional athletes, there are CEOs. We still continue, even though we're making tough decisions, to give back, to support the organizations that so critically rely on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that I've been amazed is we've been giving out checks to 2,500 of our part-time workers out of this fund that the players helped create. And I've gotten letters from ushers and concession workers, many of saying, I've got this money, but I think other people probably need it more than I do, so they want to return the check. And that kind of selfless, charitable instinct from people is just, it's heartwarming, and it's incredible that in a time of when everybody's got financial challenges, nobody's immune from economic dislocations relating to the virus. The fact that people are selflessly wanting to give back what we've given them to somebody that may need it more is it makes you feel good about the human condition.
Well, and what you're also talking about is building loyalty, because as Ted mentioned, we were in this labor shortage just 3 short months ago. We were talking about how do we retool our workforce to fit the job needs. And so we're still kind of going to be looking at that same question, but not from a shortage standpoint, but from a you know, an employee-employer match standpoint. So that, I think that was a fascinating point. Kimberly, we're going to kind of go around the table and close this up. And starting with you, you could share as you navigate this, as you work with your clients, your customers. As a CEO, you still need to be invigorated. You still need to find inspiration. What do you look to? Are there any authors? Are there any resources that you can recommend for those who are with us today?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think the word empathy has come up a lot over the past couple of months as leaders are looking at how we're managing some very difficult, even treacherous situations where we're looking at the bottom line and we're looking at the viability of the business and making sure that we're shoring up the business, but we're also trying to meet our employees and our customers where they're at, and recognizing that we're going to make some tough decisions, but we want to stand in their shoes and demonstrate empathy. So one of my favorite books is Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman. So he was at the very beginning of emotional intelligence. So I would recommend that book to anyone if you haven't read it, to learn a little bit about EQ. And I'm going to post a couple of links in the chat section for resources that I've tapped into on an ongoing basis, and I continue to tap into for the latest information about communications and public relations. Great article from the Institute of PR about employee communications and how COVID-19 is forcing CEOs to rethink the importance of internal communications. And another great link about how customers and employees are watching our brands and the importance of reputation management during this time and really living in our values.
Tremendous.
So Primal Leadership, and I'll share some links.
Fabulous. Let's go to you, Rick. We're going to go around the horn the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of books, but I think the best thing I've done is I talk to Commissioner Seelig about 5 times a week, and you know, he lived through 8 work stoppages. He lived through 9/11, worked through the financial crisis and how it affected our industry, and he's just been a great resource and a source of, you know, guidance, inspiration, humor, and you know, I think in our industry, which is, you know, such a public-facing business, you know, I think he's been very helpful in sort of helping us and helping me personally navigate through some of this craziness. And you know, it's a friendship that I treasure, and it's one that's been very helpful.
Tremendous. Austin, how about you?
My favorite leadership inspiration book. I mean, the other thing, I can't watch them. You know, I get so mad, regardless of the network I'm on. It all makes me angry. But I try to read a lot of news, and I try to read Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and then Axios, who are
Tremendous. So a lot of news. I mean, sometimes it's day by day, I would say, right? Sometimes you're like, you need to watch the news, and other times you're like, I need to turn this thing off. So Ted, how about you? What do you look to for inspiration?
Sure. Well, for inspiration, I love just being in our stores because I think our employees and our customers are just great. I always get inspired by our employees. They're so positive and, you know, just really fantastic. But from a leadership standpoint, there's 2 things that I rely on. I'm a member of a Vistage group, so I get to meet periodically with other business leaders, and we get to talk about all kinds of issues. And that's been a real source of, you know, really a sounding board to help navigate through all these issues that we've been experiencing. And then from a leadership standpoint, I just finished reading a book called $1 Trillion Coach. Very good book. A lot of the principles that we've talked about on this call are discussed in this book, so I'd recommend it.
Fabulous. Well, that brings us to the close of our hour. Thank you all so much for being with us, and thank you to our panelists. We are so grateful, not just for your time here today, but for your leadership, for our community, and everything that you do for us, and especially for taking the time again today. Thank you again to Landmark Credit Union for being the presenting sponsor for today's session, and please mark your calendars for the next 3 Wednesdays at 1 p.m. We have a fabulous lineup to continue our series. So with that, we'll close it off and have a great day.